Welcome back to Meet the Press, Senator King.
Great to be with you, Andrea. Good morning.
Good morning to you. I wanted to talk to you first about the filibuster. You were one of the resistors to going against the filibuster, but this week, when for a third time Republicans blocked even any debate on voting rights, you began to change and say that you might consider alterations to the filibuster. What are you willing to consider? Getting rid of it altogether, or having a talking filibuster, which is what they used to do? Where are you now?
Well, I think I'm not really ready to say let's get rid of it altogether, because I think there are circumstances where it makes sense. So I prefer some alternative to what the present rule is. I'd like to restore the Senate to what it was, where we actually had debates and people had to hold the floor. And so I think some kind of talking filibuster, perhaps a rule that instead of having to have 60 votes to pass something, you'd have to have 41 votes to stop it. So that way the minority would at least have to show up. So we've got to do something about this, at least when it comes to something as crucial as democracy itself, as voting rights.
Well, do you think we could get 50 votes, though, to change that rule? Would Senators Manchin and Sinema, for instance, go along with it?
Well, you know, I've talked to both of them, and I can't say for sure. I don't want to read minds here. I know that both of them have resisted it, as have I, because once you monkey with the rule, then it's going to work both ways. It's going to come back, and it could come back to bite those who want to move things forward right now. Today's obnoxious obstruction tomorrow could be a precious shield, but when it comes to democracy, I think Joe and Kirsten will listen. Joe Manchin's a former Secretary of State. He believes in people's right to vote. He helped negotiate the bill that we brought to the floor the other day that they wouldn't even let us get to a debate on. I mean, it was a filibuster of a motion to just bring the bill to the floor. And I think Joe might be ready to listen to not a abolition of the filibuster, but some modification to make it to allow us to move forward, to give the minority all the rights in the world to speak, to debate, to make their points. But at some point, we've got to be able to make decisions. The trick, Andrea, is respecting minority rights, while at the same time not empowering the minority with an effective veto. That's the needle that we're trying to thread here.
Now, talking about trying to thread the needle, let's talk about the so-called reconciliation, the social spending bills. And so much focus has been on the trillions of dollars that are being spent, and not on what is being cut, and not on what is still in there. But how do you feel right now, for instance, about the billionaires tax that apparently is one of the things that's being considered to get around Senator Sinema's opposition to raising rates on the wealthy?
Well, you know, number one, I think you're right. I think one of the mistakes in this has been all the attention has been on what the number is, 3.5 billion, 2.8, 2.2, whatever it is, rather than what's in the bill. Why are we doing this? And, you know, I think back, Andrea, to the 50s, the two most important federal policies of the 50s that propelled us into the prosperity of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, there were two. One was the interstate highway system, and the other was the GI Bill. I talked to a guy just the other day, 96 years old, enlisted in the Navy during World War II. The GI Bill changed his life. He didn't even finish high school when he enlisted. He came back, finished high school, went to college. And so really what we're talking about is a GI Bill for the 21st century.
Let me ask you about Senator Joe Manchin and climate, because right now the climate provision's really out of the bill. The president's going to try to do things by executive order, we're told, but that can always be overturned, challenged in the courts. So you've lost the climate provisions. And Senator Manchin is talking about, even at one point this week, becoming an independent like you. How do you feel about Senator Manchin becoming an independent, still voting with Democrats, and losing so much of climate, which is so important to Mainers?
Well, first, let me take the independent part. Of course, I'd welcome an expansion of my caucus by a third. But on the other hand, I think Joe had a rather colorful response to that. It started with the word bold. So I don't really think that's going to happen. Listen, Joe is the chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. I'm on that committee. We've done a lot under his leadership on climate this year. on things like energy efficiency, on energy storage, which, by the way, I think is the real key to a clean energy future. And he's facilitated that. He's worked through it. He didn't like the provisions that were in the president's proposal, but I don't think that necessarily means that he's death on climate legislation. I think there are other ways to approach this problem to get to the same result. Clearly, we've got to get there. It's one of my major priorities in Congress. I used to carry a card around that shows the gross expansion of CO2 in our atmosphere and what it's doing to the planet. So I'm all in on this subject, but I think there are still going to be paths that we can find to solve the problem, or at least to begin. I shouldn't have said solve the problem, to begin to solve the problem, because it really is a crisis facing this country and the world. The other piece, Andrea, that we've got to remember is we can't do it alone. And I think the most unfortunate part about losing the provisions of the reconciliation bill is that it weakens Joe Biden's hands in Glasgow, the climate meeting that's coming up. Because if we're going to get the rest of the world to take serious steps to remedy this problem, we've got to do it ourselves. So I'm disappointed that we're not going to be able to move forward with those provisions, but I think there are going to be other alternatives, and I think Joe Manchin will be there.
And in fact, he's going to be in Wilmington today negotiating with the president one-on-one. So we'll wait to see what comes out of that. So great to see you, Senator Angus King. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrea. Great to be with you.